All right, welcome everyone to our white wine evaluation seminar. I really appreciate everyone who has come out to join us today. This is one of the events that is new in this last year where we have been exploring different varietals, and today's event is all focused on white wines, and I'm going to hand it over to our distinguished moderator, Art George.
Thanks, Jesse. Hey. We have distinguished panelists here today. Closest to me is Steve Brown and John Gilbert in the middle, Jerry Shoemaker on the right. They were all notable white winemakers in our group, and so we're happy to have them here today to share their experience and wisdom. I'll moderate. We have about 6 topics to go through on an agenda here, and as we finish each one, people can ask questions, and then when we're done with that, we'll go to the next topic. So at the beginning, I'd like if each of you could maybe summarize your general overall philosophy of making white wine, and maybe cover the differences between making aromatic and non-aromatic white wines. And you can each summarize in no more than 2 minutes or so, and then we can have discussion and questions. So start right on my right here with Steve.
Okay, let's see, it's afternoon, so good afternoon, everybody. I'll just start by saying I've been making wine for 17 years, white wine for 16 years, focusing on Chardonnay. I've made a few other whites, but I make Chardonnay every single year. That's kind of my go-to. My philosophy is to get good grapes, as you know, the best grapes you can possibly get, hopefully with the bricks in the right range. Keep it simple, less is more. Don't over handle it or stress about it. And as far as aromatic versus non-aromatic, since I make Chardonnay, I always try to go through full ml malolactic fermentation, which you may not want to do with more aromatic whites. So I tend to try to make a traditional Chardonnay with full ml, full fermentation, oak, a Rombauer-like style is what I describe it. So that's my take on Chardonnay and white wines.
I've been part of the winemaking plan now for 6 years. Great exposure to this as well. We now have a cafe for 3 years. We have Sauvignon Blanc, and a couple of varietals. I've mainly been making Sauvignon Blanc. I sort of make it in the Bordeaux style. You have 3 different styles you can make it in. That's the first thing you determine when you're going to make a wine is what kind of style you want to make. Obviously, Sauvignon Blanc that I've worked with is you either do a New World, which is maybe New Zealand, grassy, or a Loire Valley, which is maybe mineral, and then there's a Bordeaux style, which is maybe more mouthfeel. None of them have malolactic, getting the aromatics. Like Steve said, I make a good focus on aromatic whites that are light body, like an Albarino or Pinot Gris or Sauvignon Blanc versus a Marsanne or Roussanne or Oak Chardonnay, which has malolactic, which is aromatics. My main focus has been on Bordeaux style. So
kind of want to start off with saying that there is no such word in the French language for winemaker. It's a wine manager. Wine wants to become grape juice, then it becomes wine, then it becomes vinegar, then it becomes water and CO2. So your job is to stop in the wine in that process where you want it to be. There's a big difference. There's 2 people here that think that making red wine is easier than making white wine, and 1 person that thinks making white wine is easier than making red wine. So I think making white wine is a lot easier than red wine, because a red wine is a lot easier because you just let it go. You just stand and watch it and just make interjections every once in a while. So my whole thing of white wine making is keep it cool, keep it under 60 degrees. During fermentation, it's an endothermic reaction compared to a red wine, which is an exothermic reaction, so it'll put off heat. So keep it cool in your wine making, keep it under 60.
Jerry. Before other questions, I'm wondering for John and Jerry, you always make it 100%.
Always on.
Because you mentioned Bordeaux.
I actually, in my black, I have 90%. Well, which gives the blue bit more aromatic, and I just feel blended. Softer.
I'll ask for any questions from the live audience first and then from the Zoom audience. Anybody have any questions?
Okay, I have a question for Jerry. I think mostly because when we did the rosé wine making seminar, you talked a lot about using native yeasts. Do you do that with your whites too?
I'll touch on that later when we get down to the point, but I have become a very strong proponent of natural fermentation, but I'll talk about that when we get down to that.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a question for John. You said there are 3 different types of Bordeaux, the New Zealand and the Loire, and I can't remember what the other one was. Are these like clones? It's not like how you're manipulating the wine.
A lot of it is from where you're getting your grapes. The New World New Zealand style is cooler climate, and you're going to get more green vegetable, type of grassiness, gooseberry. As you warm up a little bit, you get into the Loire Valley. That's more where they have a mineral-rich soil. We have more minerality, and it has a little bit more of what they call tomcat, cat peas, more in there, and that's more in the raw. The Bordeaux are ones that are different. So it's partly the processing, but a lot of times warmer climate. I really like having canyon, so it gets out to be 100 degrees out there. We have warm weather. Tends to be warm weather vineyards.
Yeah, I have a quick question, probably for Steve. How do you determine when your malolactic is done? Is that per taste?
I think that's on the agenda here, so we'll get to that. Okay, do we have any questions from people watching on Zoom? Hello?
Are there any
question.
questions for the Zoom panelists?
No question, but make sure they speak loudly.
Okay, there's no questions, but they want us to speak louder. Okay.
We can't hear you, John.
Okay.
Standing.
Okay, let's turn it just a little bit.
I didn't realize there was a pop-up there. Sorry, guys.
Okay, now we're going to turn to the crush and pressing. Let's start on Jerry's side. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. The first thing is how hard to press. I have a bladder press, which is a pretty soft press compared to a compression press. I like a bladder press. I think it's a soft press. And pre-run versus press, I put it all together. I don't separate it. And they asked about how long on time of the skins. It's like I crush it, destem it, and press it. I don't wait, and then I let it settle for 24 to 48 hours, and rack it off the gross lees, and then further rackings after that. We'll talk about that a little bit later when we get down to what type of vessels we like to use.
Okay, John?
We have our own vineyards. We harvest pretty early in the morning, and then I immediately add a little bit of SO2 and ascorbic acid as an antioxidant. Take it directly to the crusher, but we don't crush. We just have a destemmer because we're trying to keep the tannins low. What we do ready to go directly to crush. We add a lot of dry ice to keep it more reductive winemaking style. Keep the oxygen out. Directly to press after that. No skin time at all. as Jerry said, we don't want to have any bitterness or tannin pickup or any extra gain mouthfeel wise from having skin contact. You're fighting it later on with maybe astringency and bitterness, and then having to fine out for it. I tend to add both press juice and free run. It's about 2/3 free, 1/3 press, and difference. We're dealing with small amounts. We want to get all the wine we can, and I generally I add a PDPP, a fining agent, when I press to get some clarity, because I'm trying to get my turbidity at a certain level, so I have a good fermentation and don't bring up the reductive aromas.
Hey, so I guess very similar to Jerry's approach, crush, destem, press, using the bladder press, because the berries are new and not broken down, the skins aren't broken down, there seems to be a lot of whole berries in that process, so I tend to press twice, and I'll get another gallon or two. Like John said, we don't make large quantities, so we want to get as much juice and wine as we can in the end. So I press twice. And then the only other thing I'd add to what Jerry said is that I chill the juice overnight. I usually put it in carboys and then into large tubs with ice, chill it down to basically refrigerator temperature, and then rack it off the next day, 24 hours, and start fermentation that next night. So basically, that's what Jerry said.
If you do the first press and then you open it up and you take a handful of the mud and squeeze it, and if you're getting juice, you can press it again.
Yeah, sure. That's what I do.
For sure.
And then just like both John and Jerry said, is I don't try to separate pre-run from the rest. It all goes together in the end. And that's really about it. I think I covered it. Yeah.
And you all mentioned trying to get as much juice as possible. There's a trade-off there. You press it harder, you'll get a little more juice, but there can be some downsides to that. So how do you guys figure that out?
Well, I don't crush them, so because we're only having destemming, these are all small scale presses we're dealing with here. You're just not going to press like a commercial press.
Yeah.
Where they will get that so dry that cake will be powder almost. Whereas we still are going to have some wetness, and you're just not going to be able to take all those tannins out of it. But that's really why I don't leave it on the skins very long. Same thing, you don't want to have the tannins.
I know when I press it burns, we throw these rice husks in.
I do that.
You guys do that or
Yeah.
not?
Yeah, that helps.
Maybe
Creates some
you could
friction.
explain the benefits to the audience for that. What's the benefit?
It just creates friction in the grapes to help them press and squeeze and get the juice out.
It's basically creating like you said, channels for the juice to get out through the grape skins. And leaving some stems in it is the same thing.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I know the Fred, he crushes the stems and then he'll add the stems back into the press. Yeah, you're going to get a little tannin out of that. I think it's minimal.
I only do that when I only have a basket press can. So if I have a bladder press, I usually because you get a better, more uniform press with the bladder. The basket is only coming on top. So
Right.
you show the layers.
This makes sense. Things I have a bladder press now. So I let it go up to about 2. The scale there. And then back off, let it go, and then turn it back up again. I like to draw the process out a little more time-wise. It approximates the commercial liner style. So it's a way of getting the juice out eventually, but without having to press it hard.
I just press it until the relief valve blows. Then back it off a little bit. So it's more like 3, not 2.
I fish the relief valves to get more.
All right, any questions from the live audience?
You had a note here about enzymes while on the skins.
Yeah, I skipped that because we'll get that on the skins.
Oh, we're gonna
I
address
do
that
add-
later.
I do add an enzyme always religiously just to aid in the breakdown.
At what stage?
At the crush.
At the front.
At the crush.
Okay, wait, I have a question. So the only white that we've made has been Torontes, and I think Jerry's familiar with that. Because he got, you guys also. So this grape is like crazy fleshy, and we actually broke a bladder press trying to squeeze the juice out. And so if I ever get Torontes again, do you have any suggestions for how did you manage this grape, and any suggestions about it?
Buy more grapes. Buy more grapes.
The question was with Torontes, since it's a real fleshy grape, it's hard to press the juice out. So we'll hear from our panel on how they handle that.
Would the enzymes handle that or not?
It's a gelatinous grape. Like you said, it's just flesh. It's just not that much juice in it. You're just not getting the same yields you're going to get out of other grapes that just have more juice.
So just don't worry about the amount of juice.
It's
Just
what you get.
press it, and you got what you got.
Yeah.
Okay.
Add rice hulls, add an enzyme, press, but you're going to get what you get. You're not going to squeeze blood out of a turnip if it's not there.
When we did our Torontes, ran it through the bladder press twice, we still had whole grapes in there.
Yeah.
I mean, they just wouldn't break down.
It's like the crazy.
Yeah.
And I turned the rest into a cider. I have
That's a
one
good
little
idea.
mini keg left. It's really good.
Okay, I think we can move on to the fermentation topic. Let John go first this time.
The first thing I do is after we press and it's settling, I usually wrap it off in about 2 days. Like I say, I run a full juice panel on all my wines, which is bricks, titratable acidity, TA, pH, blend through. Turbidity with white wine because there is sort of a sweet spot. Sulfur compounds that don't get into the fermentation and get sluggish and suck by getting too clear. I sort of have a target on my 7-ounce Blanc about 7 grams per liter of TA and a pH 325 to 330. My ripeness is not. As long as they're ripe, it's more to taste than bricks. They come in about 20 days. I do all my fermentation. Which is more for New World style. It's a higher temperature. You want to ferment average maybe get to the club. Ferment maybe 65, not 50. Yeah, my temperature is 65 to 70.
So as far as fermentation, of course, I want to know what the pH is in the bricks. Get the TA also, although I don't obsess over acid like I used to in the beginning. You can always adjust that later in the process. But if the bricks are too high, you definitely want to water it back with acidulated water to no more than 24 bricks. And like John mentioned, usually you prefer to have the TA in the minimum 6.5 grams to 7.5 grams in that range of acid per liter. So the main adjustment I'll make is just adjusting the bricks before fermentation. And then, as I mentioned before too, is I'll chill the juice, rack it off the gross lees, so don't have an explosive fermentation 24 hours after the crush. Try to keep it as cool as I can. I don't have a refrigeration unit. I work in my garage, so I put carboys in tubs with some water wrapped with wet towels for an evaporative cooling to just try to keep it as cool as possible. It usually doesn't get above the 70s during fermentation, even in my garage. And then since I always make Chardonnay, I use ICV D47 yeast, which is a traditional Chardonnay yeast. And then nutrients, I use GoFirm, of course, for primary, and then ActDML with a secondary fermentation. I've never had a stuck fermentation in 17 years, so I don't know why that's a problem. If you take care of your yeast and nutrients properly, it shouldn't be a problem. Always strive to get 0% residual sugar. I've never artificially stopped it and tried to preserve any residual sugar. And as I mentioned before, I always strive for a full MLF, but I've never tested for it. So I never know if I've gotten all the way through it or not. There's only one time with Chardonnay where it warmed back up in the spring and it started to bubble again. And in 16 years, that's the only time that it hadn't finished, to my knowledge, by the Christmas holidays. And it started back up by itself. And then I let it go through until it was completely still. And that's another point, is I'll wait until the wine is 100% still before I ever think about, the final stages of the process. And I've never had an issue after it's been in the bottle with anything bubbling. So I assume I've always gotten through 100% ml.
Steve, what is adulated water?
Acidulated.
What is it?
It's water with acid in it. So when you adjust the bricks, you're not also dragging the acid down. So you basically prepare the water with 7 grams of acid.
Oh, so
already in it.
you add the acid to it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, because everything I've read is not to use distilled water because those minerals aren't there that the yeast needs.
Yeah,
So can you talk a little bit more about the water?
I was gonna ask Steve, what kind of water do you use when you put
To-
the water in?
To drop the bricks, it's
Yeah.
always distilled water.
Distilled?
Mhm.
I only had to do it once. I used Evian.
It's French.
Distilled water with 6 to 7 grams of acid in it. If you know your acid's a little low, you can bump up the acid in the water so that when you're dropping the bricks, you're also adding a little more acid up front, and then go from there. So
Have you ever had an MLF suck or not go very far?
I've had an MLF.
Malolactic fermentation.
Only that one time where it apparently didn't complete, because in the spring and summer when it warmed up in the garage, it started bubbling again. I just watch for the tiny bubbles.
Do you sing the song?
I just take a flashlight and watch for the little bubbles, and that's how I determine my MLF process.
Okay, Jerry, your turn.
All right, over to Jerry. Hey.
Okay, I'm a minimalist, I would guess. The only test that I run is that I care about is pH and bricks. John does a much more thorough thing with the Yan and all the other things, but like I say, I'm a minimalist in pH and bricks. And when you get to your bricks, you're looking at a white wine. You want it between 20.5 and 22. Red wine a little heavier in sugar with 22.5 to 24.5. Now, if you don't have those numbers, it's easy to add more acid. And the lower the number, the higher the acid. On the scale, 7 is neutral. Lower than that, it gets more acidic, and higher than that, it gets more basic. It's easy to add acid to wine. It's really hard to take it out. The only thing that I've been able to find to take out acid is potassium bicarbonate, and you've got to go really, really slow. If you read the chart and it says add this, add half of it and see what it does. Taking acid out is very hard to do. My yeast that I prefer is a EC118 or a Premier Cuvée. Both of them have worked fine for me. The only nutrients I've ever used is Pro Aroma or Optic White. The food that I use is Fermade K. It has DAP, diammonium phosphate, if I got that right. It has DAP in it. I use it at the start. I use it when 1/3 through fermentation, and I don't add any food yeast nutrients below 15-degree bricks. Desired residual sugar level is 0, especially with a white wine. And I don't do malolactic for my white wines. So neither Claire or I like that buttery feeling. We like the crisp, acidic, clean white wine mainly because I only do Sauvignon Blanc or Torrontés like we did the other year.
I was gonna make one comment on the stuck fermentations. I was gonna,
Mallow?
no, on the primary
Primary,
fermentation, I had a sluggish one this last year on my Sauvignon Blanc, and I attribute it to having it too cold. I have a cellar and I was able to bring it down and keep it down below 60. And I think that VL3 really does better on 65. So I basically rolled it out, warmed up the must, warmed up the juice to try to get it going again. I also was informed that you could add more nutrients. At this point, I put in 300 parts per million of NutriStart Blanc Lafleur product, and that got it going again. And I think mainly it was just too cold. It was struggling. And it's something to think about when you're fermenting. You want to have a temperature where it's going to carry through.
I got one more comment.
Go ahead.
Jerry reminded me that I do use a Fermade K or Fermade O, the organic version of Fermade at 1/3 sugar depletion, which is usually around 16, 17 bricks. So very similar to what Jerry said, but definitely want to do that to get all the way through primary.
Okay, for each of you, at what point negative bricks do you consider the primary fermentation over?
-2.
-2? Okay.
My fault. I don't have a hydrometer that measures negative bricks. So if it gets down to 0 and I taste it, I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I mean, I send off afterwards for a glue through, which is glucose, fructose, and I'm looking for less than a gram per liter. To make it dry.
Steve?
Let's see, what were we talking about?
About the dryness.
How
and
much
far
negative?
dry-
Oh, yeah. So I have a precision hydrometer and usually want to see it go into the negative, 1.5 to 2 if possible. But once it goes as far as it goes negative, then I go, it's done. You're right.
That's it. I mean, I like to get it to a 1.5, but if it stays at 1 for 2 or 3 days, then I say,
Well,
okay,
most
well,
likely
that
you're
must be
there.
it.
You're done. Yeah.
Okay, questions from the audience, live audience? Yes.
Quite-
Do you want more lab in-house, John? Because you do a lot more lab.
I do a lot in house. Because of Jerry, it's his fault I got in this darn game, and he owes me $20,000. But I mean, I have mini titrators, I have turbidity meters, but I still send out. I found now a group that can do all these tests in Oregon Coronology for about 1/3 of the price of ETS or Vinquery.
Wow.
So I ship everything up to Oregon for big stuff like a juice panel. For a whole wine panel is $30. So I can afford to do it. We do 4 barrels a year, so we're doing enough wine to justify it rather than just 1 or 2 carboys. That would be prohibitive. I think it'd be an expensive bottle of wine.
How long does that take between when you send it out and when you get the results back?
I send it out 2-day air, and they have them the same day. I have a very good relationship with them. So I'm more than happy to give anybody their address. Jason's a great guy up there. They're in McMinnville. And like I say, you go to ETS, it's 3 times the price, and Melissa can attribute to that. I think she uses them as well now.
Yeah, I still use ETS simply because I don't have that much wine that I make.
Yeah.
So it's not that expensive. And I'm a little lazy too, so. I used to do more myself, and then I got tired of it, so I just send it off.
It is hard.
Yeah. All right. Any questions from the Zoom audience about?
Yeah, I
fermentation
have a
process?
question for Jerry.
Great. There you go.
Jerry, you mentioned on your Sauv Blanc that you don't do malolactic fermentation. A, how do you know you don't? And B, do you do anything specifically to retard it?
You mean, how do I know I don't like ML in my
No,
wine?
how do you know you don't do ML?
Oh, once the primary fermentation is done, I do the standard procedure of stopping the fermentation with SO2 and putting the whole thing as cold as possible. I just stop the fermentation, and I don't add anything to encourage ML.
So
No,
so the
You can have it
ML,
in your,
Yeah,
you can have it in your winery.
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, if you've done an ML in your barrel before and use the same barrel. it's
You,
Right.
you got a good possibility of getting some. Yeah.
No, just when fermentation is done, I just add the SO2 to stop the fermentation.
how
and
much
it stops-
SO2 do you add at that point?
Well, as any question in winemaking, it depends.
I understand.
Depends on your
The
pH.
rule of thumb is an eighth of a teaspoon to a 5-gallon carboy.
Okay, that's not a whole lot. That's like maybe
SO2 goes a long way, believe me.
30 to 40
I
parts per million.
Yeah, I can weigh
Um,
in on that too.
Go ahead.
You know, I don't do MLF on my Sauvignon Blanc as well. After fermentation, primary, I hit it with 50 parts per million because I know it's going to get eaten up right away. I'm looking generally to maintain 25 to 30, but I immediately hit it with 50 million to arrest anything. If I go down the line and I think that you know, keep it cold, like Jerry says,
Yeah.
is the main thing. The only way to really stop it is to sterile filter, and none of us really do that. So if you're keeping your wine cold, it probably won't go off, but it could be in your winery. Just the
well,
bacteria.
I don't have a winery and I don't use
Well,
barrels. So it's
in
all
your garage.
it's actually the Sauvignon Blanc for the most part is in the backyard. I've tried, and I keep SO2, you know, pretty good concentration, and I do measure it. I've got the lab equipment at home, so I have a pretty good idea what my SO2 is all the time. And I have tried in the past using, I think it's called lysozyme. It's one of
That's
the
exactly
enzymes
right.
supposedly to stop ML. Frankly, I don't think it does any good. And I like my Sauvignon Blanc, but I'm convinced, and I've made it 4 or 5 years now, I'm convinced every time I've made it, once it warms up in the latter part of the spring or the early part of the summer, it goes through ML.
It very well could be. If you're not, you know, keeping it cold, you know, it could just get
Yeah,
cold
Yeah.
again.
especially once you bottle it.
That's why I say you got to sterile filter. That's
Yeah,
why they
well,
do it in big
I
commercial
yeah,
wineries.
that's an idea.
Yeah, 0.45.
Okay.
Yeah, once you bottle it, you want to keep it cold.
Yeah,
because,
absolutely.
Well,
Otherwise.
yeah, I'm not going to
Dark.
bottle it if I think it's still, even if it's, you know, a very, very light ML, I'll keep it in the carboys for months and months and months before I bottle it.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I have a
Okay,
question.
And
Well, one more.
the thing about white wines and rosés for that matter is they're made to be drunk early. You're not talking about a red wine that you can put in the cellar and drink it 15 years
I drink
later.
it plenty early.
Yeah, usually 3 in the afternoon is.
Right out of the carboy.
But I have this chart, which you probably can't see very well, and it's all based on the pH. And for aging, there's a certain number, and for Brett suppression, which is bottling, it's a little different number. And then there's a formula that if you have a pH of like 3.20, you want 13 parts per million of SO2, and then you go to this formula, and it comes out to be like 1.5 grams or something like that for a carboy. That's what I use to stop my fermentation.
Yeah, I'm pretty familiar with all of that and keep track of pH and SO2 pretty carefully. And I know all the equations and charts to make sure that molecular SO2 stays high enough to do what it's supposed to do. And that's the couple things I do send out to a lab is to check molecular SO2 just to make sure my own home lab stuff is accurate. So I'm pretty sure I keep it, you know, up where it's supposed to be. And I like the Sauvignon Blanc that I make, but I'm convinced it's going through malolactic eventually as soon as the weather warms up.
Well, there's another thing you can do. You can go on the internet, winemaker sulfite calculator.
Yeah, I've used that.
You
I
dial
don't
that
think it
in and
works very well.
fill in the blanks with the numbers, and they'll they'll tell you how much
Yeah.
KMBS to add to your wines. It's very,
Yeah.
it's very helpful.
The online calculators are great, right? There's a really good app called Wine Math.
Okay,
Right? It's a really good one to have for just doing those basic calculations.
yeah. If you couldn't hear that, Fred was saying there's an app.
I did hear it.
Called Wine Math, MATH.
Yes.
Okay.
I've used the one that Jerry uses and it's fabulous.
Yeah.
Jerry's fabulous or the, okay,
Jerry's
okay,
fab.
okay.
Okay,
Okay,
it's good.
I think we can move now. We have a short topic here about the choice. of-
Well, I have a question.
Oh,
I had a question I never got to ask. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
All right. So first of all, I also wanted to echo that I think the core enology up in McMinnville is a really nice lab that saves a lot of money from the ETS lab and an artist inquiry way I used to do business. And so I'm just putting a plug for what John Gilbert said. I've had great results with that. I send it off on 2-day via UPS and it usually gets there the next day and they're very quick on the turnaround and it's half the price. So even the shipping costs make it worthwhile. But my question for the panelists, and I think all of you agree that at 1/3 depletion, you add some additional nutrients for your yeast. What have you done in the past if for some reason your fermentation went a little hot or fast and you go and check the hydrometer readings below 1/3? Do you waive off on adding? Do you add a partial or do you add none for the nutrients? If you're past 1/3 and you wanted to do it, but you missed it.
Nothing
great-
below 15.
That's a great question. I've had a fast fermentation and missed that 16 to 17 bricks, and I've still added it below 15. And
I'm
The same amount or
I'm in
I'd
Steve's.
go as low as 12.
Yeah, I'm in Steve's camp. I say the same thing. If you wake up and you got it going all night long and you jump that night, you just add it. It needs some still nutrients later in the game, and you don't want to not give it to it.
yeah, better
You know,
safe than sorry.
It
is
really
my
comes
approach.
down to your requirements early on. You want to get through the whole thing. If you don't have enough nutrients to get you through, and you should do your homework with yeast assimilated nitrogen. You need to know where you're at, how much to add at each stage. Sometimes you don't need to put anything at 1/3 because you've had good yan to start with, and you can go right through the fermentation. I have that sometimes in certain grapes.
Yeah, Jennifer, you mentioned about, if it's going too fast and it's too hot. For me, at least, it's not so much a matter of not putting nutrients in. It's more cooling it off, literally by putting some ice bombs in and cooling it off, because you want the fermentation to take a longer time because the wine will taste better at the end. So rather than fool with the nutrients or not use the nutrients, I just cool it down and it literally takes like a half hour. You can throw them in and it can go from 95 to 80, in the course of a half hour.
I was going to make one comment on that. On my Sauvignon Blanc, my fermentations last 25 to 30 days. So, I'm literally moving less than a brick a day. So it doesn't jump past me. Early on it will when you're doing your first phase, it's going to move really quick, but you're going to have time as it starts to move through it, and you're going to need those nutrients later on. So my last one was 32 days.
Yeah, actually, the temperatures I gave are pertaining to red wines.
Yeah.
But,
I was just saying that was kind of warm.
But the white wines can be too warm too, and you have to cool it off. So the temperatures are different, but the principle's the same.
John, you said your last white wine fermentation was 32 days. How much wine were you talking about? You talking about a barrel?
Yeah.
Okay, because I'm talking 5-gallon carboys, and mine goes through in 7 to 10 days, and it's done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's the volume has an effect on what you're doing.
Can I add to that? I had 80 gallons of Hancock Chardonnay that didn't finish until like a month ago.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to go to the container
One
for
last-
bulk aging.
Well, one last follow-up question
Oh,
for John Gilbert. So John, for your white wines, what yan are you looking for? Like you said, if the yan's high enough, you don't add any at the 3rd depletion.
You know,
What would
250
you
or
consider
higher,
adequate to
I'm
put
not,
without
I'm not look. You know, 250 yen or higher is ideal. You know, you just need to have enough nutrients in there. I mean, it's for me to take it off the top of my head, I wouldn't know what to tell you. I calculated out of how much the DAP's going to add, how much the Nutrifirm's going to add, how much to add at each stage and do it. So I'm literally hitting the number where I want to be. I'm taking it, you know, from, you know, what's required of this yeast, and every yeast is different. You know, some are high nutrient requirements, others are low. So, you know, VL3 needs a little bit, you know, higher nutrients. So I need to be up in the 250, 300 range to be able to get it through. So that's really what it comes down to. Everyone's a little different. You just need to do your homework on them.
Okay, containers for bulk aging, carboys versus barrels, maybe depending upon what variety you're making, and maybe oak substitutes if you're not using a barrel stage or something else.
Okay, I'll go first. With Chardonnay, I've pretty much exclusively used glass, either carboys, demijohns, every once in a while, 15-gallon keg for a short period. But this year I retired my red barrel. I have a new French oak barrel that I'm going to dedicate to Chardonnay. So I'm going to shift to barrel aging my Chardonnay, not until it's been racked a few times. So there's not really sediment going into the barrel. And that's always worked out well. But I also do use oak cubes during MLF because the bacteria likes somewhere to harbor, and oak cubes help that. And then in a neutral barrel, I would use oak sticks to add the oak into it. So combination of all the above.
Okay, John?
You know, I do everything in stainless steel tanks. Like Fred said, if you got small amounts, sometimes it ends up in a carboy. But I also use half barrel, neutral French oak barrel, half stainless after fermentation, and I let it sit in the neutral oak barrel, half of it, for 3 to 4 months, which gives it a little bit more of a texture, a soft mouthfeel. And then I blend the two back together afterwards for the final wine in there. And I may even do a little bit less time in the barrel. I've been playing anywhere from 2 months to 4 months. I think 4 months is too much. 2 months maybe not enough. So every year's different. Taste as you go. Don't over oak.
Were you saying that was a 30-gallon neutral oak barrel?
I have a 30-gallon neutral oak I've been using for 3 years.
Strictly for white wine.
For strictly for, it was an old Chardonnay, which maybe I'm getting some MLF out of it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I'd love to find like a 15-gallon neutral oak wine.
Yeah,
Because that would
15s
be
are
a better size, but 30 gallons a lot. That's great.
Yeah, I found it up here in Santa Maria at Barrels Unlimited.
Do you find you add oak to it? Do you like
No, I don't think so. I don't think it adds any at all. I think it's more or less just getting the oxygenation of the barrels, that you're getting that ingress of oxygen to give it a little bit more soft feel rather than a hard stainless.
Honestly, I think white wines do benefit from that. Okay, the one limitation I have making in tanks and kegs, right? The carboys are the same way because
it's an inert,
oxygen ingress. Right? But there's certain age-worthy white wines that do good with that, right? So I think it's cool that you got a good-sized barrel.
Yeah, it's just enough to give it that mouth, because I make it in a Bordeaux style. That is that texture, that mouthfeel, more than a aromatic, grassy New Zealand style, which you would be 100% stainless, reductive winemaking, no oxygen, argon over the top, which I've done as well. So
I do that a lot too here.
Very.
Okay, I'm very definite on this. I use strictly carboys, and I use strictly plastic. And the reason for that is a glass carboy weighs about 6 to 7 pounds. You put 30 gallons or 5 gallons of wine in there, you're talking 6 to 8 pounds per gallon. So I can't lift them anymore. So I need that lightweight. And the thing I like is I use a 5-gallon, it's called a big mouth bubbler. The top of the bubbler is about this wide of an opening. And it's got a good seal top on it. And so it takes the fermentation, doesn't blow the top off. And when you're done, you get in there with a scrubby and get it really, really clean, as clean as you want to. And I use a product called PBW.
Brewery wash.
Yeah,
Good stuff.
and it is good stuff. You put it in there with in heated water for 24 hours, and it's crystal clear as the day it was born. PBW, wonderful
Works for
stuff.
Stainless, works for glass, works for plastic.
Yeah.
If it's not your #1 cleaning solution in your winery, you're kind of missing the point of having a really good remove all the stains cleaner. PBW is the bomb. It's the
Yeah.
one.
And the reason I like to use either glass or plastic, you can see what's going on. You got a barrel, you have no idea what's going on inside there. You don't know if you have leaves on the bottom or if you have, bugs crawling through your wine, but you can see what you're doing. And in winemaking, you have to see what you're doing, I think. Very strong about that.
Okay.
I honestly, Jer, I agree with that. But if you know what you're doing and you're following the right steps, you know what's
nose,
going on in
the
your
smell.
barrel. You know what's going on in your kegs, right? You know what's going on there.
You know where your kids are?
You can't see it, but you know.
Okay.
I was
Any
gonna make,
questions on that from the live audience? No. All right. Anybody from the Zoom audience have questions about the containers for bulk aging?
I use the plastic carboys because I live in a condo and I can't take a glass, it would break.
well, they're good.
Yeah.
The ones you have. are really good.
Yeah,
Okay.
the one that make these things.
Anybody else?
What do you call it? PBA.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next topic, which is various things that you do to the wine, various processes during the bulk aging. So let's see. Jerry goes first this time.
Yeah, this is going to be really quick because I don't do much during bulk aging. I don't do oak. I don't have the capability of doing cold stabilization. I have a very small room that I have a window air conditioner in, and so the room stays right 57, 58 degrees. And so that's where I do all of my white wine things. And aging on lees, I 24 to 48 hours on the gross lees. I've never done sour lees, which is stirring after that. And I don't know why. Something I might try. Oxygen management. If I don't have enough liquid to top off, it's CO2. Some people don't like CO2. They think it adds nastiness, but I mean, you're only talking about a thimble full of CO2. And the next one is racking, how and when. That's what I like about plastic carboy. You rack when it looks like it needs it. If you got an inch of sediment on the bottom of your wine, rack it. I mean, racking's not good. And when you rack it, you add 1/8 of a teaspoon of SO2. And then just prior to bottling, you do an SO2 calculation to see where it is, because this will be the last time you can add SO2 to it. So if you got too much, you're gonna have to bubble it out. If you need some, you're gonna add some.
Okay. Said it, Jerry.
Just at the last, very fining and filtering. I do have a small filter, same thing that Steve has, but I use a product called Chitosan, and it's a two package thing. And it's a clear liquid, and I don't have to run it through a filter. Chitosan is, and you can buy it through Amazon. It's hard to buy pure Chitosan, but if you type in Chitosan to Amazon, it'll get you to several products that have it involved, and I think it's wonderful. I don't think it adds anything to the wine at all, but it sure comes out clear.
Okay, Steve.
Okay, so as far as bulk aging, I guess there's probably 2 stages for me. In the beginning, after primary is done, I'll rack it and I'll still keep some of the fine lees with the wine so that I can do surly aging for a couple of months in the fall, winter, usually into the holidays. I'm actually still in that mode right now with my Chardonnay. I haven't racked it again yet. Normally I would by now, because I'll rack it 2 or 3 times, And then the final step is I will cold stabilize one carboy at a time in the refrigerator in my garage. And then when it's done, I leave it in there for 3 weeks. And then when it's done, I immediately take it out and run it through a number 2 filter, and then it's ready to bottle. So it's cold stabilized, it's filtered, it's perfectly clear, and what I refer to as my California gold wine.
Okay, John. I added bulk aging. I just put a couple other topics under there. I put bulk aging, racking, fining, filtering, because they're all during that whole window. And my whole theory is, minimal racking, avoid O2 uptake, oxygen uptake, combine operations to maximize, your transfers where you're doing operations. I test in top for a monthly. I test for SO2 in top monthly. Maybe if something doesn't smell right, I'll send it off to maybe VA, which I generally don't get any with the Sauvignon Blanc at all. It goes well. That's probably the time I'm going to make any final fine-tune adjustments for acids to fine-tune it into this numbers I'm looking for. We precipitated out a lot of the levels from the fermentation, so I want to try to get it in that 3.3 range, get my tartaric around 7 grams, my TA around 7 grams per liter. After I've got it where I want it, I go ahead and do a bentonite. I protein stabilize it. Do bench trials. Don't just pick a number. My Sauvignon Blanc, I've been doing it for 5 years, so I sort of know it takes about 0.75 grams per liter to push it through. If I do have some astringency from tannins, I may do a little gelatin. I did this year just to soften it a little bit. Generally don't have to. After that, I cold stabilize. If I can get it down below 30 degrees, I can get it done in 4 days. If not, it takes about 2 weeks at 40 degrees. So if you have to put it in the refrigerator at 38, count on 2 weeks at least to get it done. At that point, I rack it off and I'm pretty much ready to filter. I'm with Steve. I broke last.
Okay.
I got the mini Buonvino.
So do I.
I do too.
And I use a number 2.
Yeah, number 2 is the polishing.
Just to polish.
Yeah. If you want to go sterile, you got to go 0.45.
You need a whole new setup if you're going to do a sterile filter. The Buonvino won't get you.
No.
Yeah, that's not my objective, just to polish it.
Right.
Okay, does anybody from the live audience have questions on this topic?
I have a question about bottling.
That's next.
That's next.
Oh, okay.
Wait.
I'll wait.
Okay, anybody
I
on the
wait.
Zoom audience have questions about this topic?
Do any of you bottle your whites without filtering or cold stabilizing?
She's asking whether anybody doesn't filter.
Well, that was my last comment. I think when I was talking was on this year, I'm going to do 3 lots. One of them unfiltered. I put that in a keg. The next one's going to be a 2 micron. And the last third will be in a 0.45 sterile, just for fun to see what the difference if it reduces any of the flavor profile. That's really it. I can keep it cold, so I'm not worried about warming up and things like that.
She asked if anybody doesn't filter.
Well, I did filter it below, but I thought it took away from the flavor.
I've never filtered a wine in my life, ever.
And plus the filter leaked too much.
Yeah.
So I lost some volume of the wine, and I didn't want that to happen. So I think it's one vino.
Yeah, but you recover that.
Yeah, I do. I take it out of the
into a
tray and
small
put it back.
carboy
Yeah.
and you dump it back in.
Yeah.
Don't lose any wine. Never. To answer Jennifer's question, I used to cold stabilize and not filter for many years. And now I've just made filtering part of my normal routine after cold stabilization, just to polish it and be done.
Have you noticed any loss of color,
Just
flavor?
a question.
Say again?
Have you noticed any loss of flavor or color due to the filtering?
Negative.
No. Me neither. You
Okay.
lost maybe color a little bit. You may lighten it up a little bit, but I don't think any flavor loss.
No.
All right, good. Thank you.
No.
Well, in my point, when I use the chitosand, it comes out crystal clear, so I have no need to filter. Can't get any clearer.
Find it if you have to, but never filter.
Okay, any other questions from the Zoom audience?
I'll step in. I filtered once, and it turned out very well. Obviously, the appearance was great, but it didn't affect the color or the flavor at all. And I used a #2 filter. The product that Jerry's talking about is called Kitasol. It's from Kraus. He turned me on to it, and it works really good. And it's a 2-part fining agent. The first part is Kitasol, which is a SO2 suspension in water. It's almost clear itself. And then the second part is Chitosan. And it's a really good product, and I like it, and I use it a lot. I don't know, there's once or twice that I've used it where it's been like 98% effective. So I've gone ahead and bottled the wine and drunk it, and it was great, but I could tell that it would have improved by filtering.
Is that the Stay Clear stuff? Comes in a clear packet?
Yeah, it's a 2-part packet.
Yeah.
Clear. And yeah, it works really well. I've also used bentonite in the past, in gelatin and other things, but I like that 2-part liquid product. It's easy to use and it works really well.
Okay, thanks, John. Okay, anybody else? Okay, just briefly on bottling. Any comments about the process? And
You know, I just had a real simple, when it tastes good, get it in the bottle. I mean, if you're there, do not wait. It's time to bottle. That's one thing I'll say right away. I always buy first grade corks. Cork tank TCA is out there. They say just buy the most common cork available because it's just manufactured a lot. So you want to use that. I always use nitrogen in white wines when I bottle. I use my sulfite levels down to 0.5 molecular, and I add 10 parts per million on top of that for bottling. And that's all I have to say.
right.
The only thing I'd add is just make sure you do that final KMS edition. And I don't have any gas when I'm bottling. I use the Enomatic and just one bottle at a time. Good grade corks, as I said. I've never had any cork issues or cork bottles of wine in 17 years, so it seems to work well. That's about it.
I don't sparge my wines, but I do run it through a bottle washer. The kind with the plunger on it, and with that solution.
Star sand.
Well,
Star sand.
or Ida4 or iodine based.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't mention sterilized the bottle.
Yeah, but Star sand, and
Always
it
sterilize
doesn't
bottles.
require rinsing, so you just do a couple of squirts, put it on the rack, upside down, and let it drain, and then you're ready to bottle.
Yep.
That Star sand works
You
good.
do that the day before or?
While, just before.
Oh, just before.
Yeah.
I do it the day before.
Yeah, I want it to evaporate a little bit.
I do it the day
They
before.
say it doesn't require rinsing.
It doesn't.
No, you can go right, and so I just run it through the thing and run it through the bottle.
It's odorless, it's colorless, it's sanitation.
Does it have a sulfur base though? Is it sulfur?
I don't
No.
think so.
No, it's iodine based. Ida4, Star Sand.
Just look that up. I don't think so. One time I saw something.
Honestly, that should be in your emergency shelter and stuff, right? Because it's like, it will purify water for years.
Okay.
Have an unopened bottle there.
Steve and Jerry, any preference for kinds of corks? Use agglomerated,
No.
natural?
The cheapest.
Okay, so just FYI, Star Sand has two ingredients. Dodocyclobenzene sulfonic acid and phosphoric acid.
That's what I wanted to say.
So I don't use that. I use an iodine based sanitizer.
Well, there is some sulfur based thing in the Star Sand.
Yeah, I don't use that for sanitizing bottles.
So nobody sanitizes with ABS?
I do
I
do
do anything. I just buy it from
I do that all the time.
The
I
last
sanitize everything KMBS.
I do it because you put the KBS to the wine anyway.
That's what I figured. So it's gonna sanitize anything.
I don't
you
because I
bottle.
don't want to add more KMS than I've already calculated.
Well, I'd rather have too much going into a wine that needs to age.
That's what I think, yeah.
Well,
I use a Star Sand on the kegs.
why do a KMS edition at the end and then randomly throw more KMS at it?
Well, I don't. At that point, depends on how long the wife is.
Anyway, everybody's got the opinion.
Okay, any
I
questions
think
on,
we're done.
any questions from the live audience on bottling?
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you, guys.
What about the Zoom audience? Any questions?
Fine.
Tally Vineyards has some extra AG, Claret, and Burgundy. I took the last of the flint. So there's nothing left. It's a problem this year. I tried to do a co-op with everybody, and it's just hard to put together 100 cases with everybody. And unfortunately, I sourced as I went by just finding wineries that don't want to stock this stuff. They just want to they want to buy what they need to bottle, and they don't want to stock an extra 20 cases that they won't use next year. So you just got to keep your eyes open and maybe talk to your winemaker friends in the business. And
I'm back to recycling my bottles.
recycle bottles,
Yeah.
and you got to clean them. You got to clean them.
You got to clean them and sanitize them, but
Not hard.
Okay, I think that about wraps it up. Thank you, everybody.
Yes.
Thank you to our panelists. I really appreciate that. It was a great session.
Calabash, wherever you are.
Well, thank you, Jen, for putting this all together, and I appreciate everybody that was on the panel tonight. Let's just turn it off, and we'll catch you guys another time.